Good evening, everyone. My name is Michelle Lutz. I'm the Director of Support Services for the School District of Springfield Township. Tonight, I am pleased to welcome you to our final workshop in our
Hey Gavin, why does
2024-2025.
Uncle Kevin not?
Um, it's Tough to Be a Parent series. Our longtime community partner, Be a Part of the Conversation, will be presenting their well-received session, Cannabis, Kids, and Solutions for Anxiety. So thank you for joining me, and I'm going to turn it over to Bob Lamb from Be a Part of the Conversation.
Thanks, Michelle. We appreciate the partnership we have with you. So yeah, tonight we're talking about cannabis, kids, and solutions for anxiety. I definitely wanted to say, thank you. And this is our, final program with y'all for the year, and we really enjoy everything that we do and the programs that we are able to offer through the support of the school district of Springfield Township. Just some housekeeping stuff will allow time for questions and conversations after you hear from the presenters. The program is being recorded. So if you do have any questions that may be personal, we just ask that we won't publish those in the recording. So feel free to be as transparent and ask any questions that may be relevant to you in the moment. And after the program ends, a survey will pop up in a link. We ask that you complete that. We always appreciate any feedback, no matter how you feel about it. And it really helps us when we're looking at, doing programs for next year to see what the community's asking for. We do have some great upcoming programs coming up. If you want to visit our website, at the end of my presentation, I'll share some links for you all that, kind of have some resources for you. Some upcoming programs we definitely do have coming up. On June 3rd, we're going to be doing a program called 21st Century Teens that looks at the behavioral and process and some of the mental health conditions that come along with being an adolescent in today's society. So it's really going to talk about like that gaming, gambling, and then some of those other behavioral addictions that may come along in adolescence. Our website and the follow-up page for tonight is going to be conversation.zone/cannabis. There you'll find any resources that we find may be relevant for you all to look at tonight. But it'll have any additional information, a link to the recording, and if Patrick has a slide deck, his slide deck potentially. Additionally, if you found this information beneficial and helpful and you're looking for more, our YouTube channel has 190 recorded programs just like these on it. So if you're looking for just additional information on cannabis or any of a variety of substances or just general substance use prevention, we have a lot of programs recorded and they've been cataloged to kind of get into the topic that they're talking about. In addition to these community programs, Be a Part of the Conversation offers a lot of support for parents and families impacted by loved one substance use. So we run support group meetings specifically for parents, guardians, anybody who may be questioning or be concerned about their loved one substance use. Some of these meetings are on Zoom, some take place in person. If you go to our website, conversation.zone/partnership, you'll come up to this calendar that has the location, whether they're in person or on Zoom. If it's in person, it'll give you the exact location. If it's on Zoom, it'll give you the Zoom link. It'll also provide information on the leaders for those support group meetings. We also have our family recovery course, which is a 3-part peer-led educational program for parents or guardians who have a child at any stage in life has struggled with addiction to drugs or alcohol. This is a free program. It's capped at 12 participants. And it's really engaging and impactful for parents who are questioning their loved one substance use, and kind of gets into understanding addiction, its impact on the family system, and how the family can heal in and of itself. That website is conversation.zone /FRC. So our program tonight, I can jump right into it. I'm going to give you a little bit of background information on cannabis and what it looks like today, and then I'm going to turn it over to Patrick Dowling, who's going to be our clinician, and then we'll hear from a person in recovery from cannabis use disorder. So, we're going to kind of talk about just some general addiction stuff here to start out. We're going to talk a little bit about nicotine and that what that looks like, and then get into cannabis. But the reason that we're really talking about this in the introduction of substances is because if you're using substances before age 18, your chances of developing a substance use disorder is 1 in 4. If we can delay that onset of use to after age 21, that number for developing an addiction drops to 1 in 25. So we're really just talking about delaying that onset of use for any psychoactive or mood altering substance, because the likelihood of developing addiction drops pretty drastically if we can delay that onset of use. The one question we always get is, why do people become addicted while others do not? One factor is genetics. There are a lot of genetic markers. So if there's a family history of substance use issues or mental health concerns, the likelihood of developing a substance use disorder greatly increase. Another factor is that psychosocial. So, what is that individual's own mental health history? What does that individual's environment look like? That kind of ties into the environmental factor. So, like, what are the societal norms around substance use? What are the factors in the community, whether it's their friends and social group, whether it's their parents' perception of harm, and that perception of risk. There's a lot of different factors that go into the environment that someone's raised in, but really it's that age of onset of use really is a large determining factor in somebody developing a substance use disorder, kind of going along with all of these things. So I'm going to talk a little bit about nicotine, and I'll explain that a little bit later why. When we look at the adolescent use of nicotine, there is like a buzz that you get the first time you use nicotine. It really hits quick, and it increases dopamine and serotonin levels, those neurotransmitters in your brain, so it can cause feelings of relaxation, calmness, a little bit of euphoria. So it is attractive, and it only lasts a few minutes. And then the user may experience some fatigue. That euphoria comes down back to baseline, or maybe even right below that, which may cause the individual to want to use again. And that's for all products containing nicotine, that's there. Prevention has done a really good job of stopping combustible cigarette use. But looking at the way that kids are imbibing nicotine these days, there's a whole bunch of different ways of vaping nicotine products. And we're kind of going to get into the marketing of that and why that's really changed. But like looking at it, one pack of cigarettes has about 22 milligrams of nicotine. Juuls, which were like kind of the hot product on the market and one of the first to market in that real popular transition from combustible cigarettes to vapes, it has about the amount of nicotine of like 37, so almost 2 packs. But then we look at some of the newer ones, and the Elf Bar is kind of one of the most common products used today as a nicotine delivery device. There's about 590 cigarettes in there. So just the amount of nicotine that people have access to that can be discreet is really, really increasing, compared to a combustible cigarette. When we look at the flavoring of it, a lot of these flavors are like really attractive to kids. The initial thought was like, oh, these products are going to be developed to transition people from combustible tobacco cigarettes to vapes so that they, will be able to stop using the combustible cigarettes and the harms associated with those. But as we can see with the flavors, it's cookie, it's fruit, it's, smells, good, it's supposed to taste good, but it's really, marketing at, and making it attractive to younger people. When we look at, like, there's Lucy Sticks are another really popular one. Like, all of this branding and bright coloring, is really looking at, targeting young people. They're even gamifying vapes. You can get these, puff and play where you have to, you can only have so many moves until you take your next hit off of the vape. And to order these products online, all you have to do is click, yes, I am 21 plus, and that you'll have access to ordering it. This is for cannabis products and vape products, but they're putting them into sweatshirts and hoodies so that it can be a little bit more discreet in social settings or classroom settings, and that it's just really making it accessible to various peoples in areas that they may not have been previously. But this is kind of the new hot product on the nicotine delivery system market. Zins or any type of these nicotine pouches go in the gums. That's just oral nicotine, and they're very, very popular. And we don't really know a lot of the long-term outcomes of long-term adolescent, nicotine use. The reason we're talking about this before we start talking about cannabis is because teens who report using e-cigarettes were way more likely to report using cannabis than non-e-cigarette users. So there's definitely some type of correlation. People may be, starting with vaping nicotine, and then transition gradually to, trying cannabis as a direct result. So when we talk about cannabis, this is really what we are talking about, the psychoactive ingredients in it and like why people use it. THC, or delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol, is the psychoactive ingredient, and the thing that really people talk about is like what gets you high when you're imbibing it. CBD doesn't really make people like high. They're popular for recreational use because they aren't intoxicating. And it actually has some benefit it may have some benefit in reducing pain and inflammation. When you talk about like controlling seizures, and even, there's some research that it may have some impact on mental illness, but there's just not enough research out there yet. And it actually balances or counteracts some of the psychoactive effects of THC. And when we talk about like THC and the potency, the product that was around, today, isn't the same product that was around in the 80s and 90s, or even the 60s and 70s. We can see that slight jump from the 60s from 1% to 3%, but like the average THC level of the dried plant, like the flower that people would roll into joints or things like that, is up pretty significantly. And then also, concentrates, the oils. We'll talk a little bit about that more later. We'll talk, they're up to 99% with like, looking at products, in dispensaries, they're averaging, some of them are averaging 90%. And then edibles have their own set of problems. They're not regulated. They're not, dosing may be inconsistent from batch to batch. So the actual effect may be different from product to product. And the delay of psychoactive impact, and when you would start to feel the effects of ingesting, is pretty long. So people may overindulge, not realizing that they're about to have a bad time or a rough time, and get a little bit too high as a result of overingesting. Hemp is the cannabis plant that contains less than 0.3% THC. So it's really used for a lot of different things. CBD products are only federally legal if they're derived from hemp and contain less than that 0.3% THC. So that's how we get a lot of the CBD products. One of the issues with that and the 2018 Farm Bill that like legalized that is with the people in the cannabis or the hemp industry were extracting THC being able to sell that in the store. So we hear a lot about Delta 8, not so much about Delta 10 THC, but we can get products like these in like gas stations, smoke shops, vape stores. Those are usually in gummies, tinctures, and vapes. 15 states do have laws on the books that are already banning these products to be able to be sold in public, and there is proposed legislation to ban it in Pennsylvania. It just hasn't happened yet. Another product that's not directly tied to cannabis, but is frequently sold in those stores is kratom. So it's also like referred to as gas station heroin because it can have that opioid-like effect, but also depending on the dose. In high doses, it has that opioid effect, so it can have that like reduced anxiety, that sedation. In low doses, it can actually be a stimulant for the individual, and it can be fatal in very high doses, but it's not really subject to much federal regulation, which adds another challenge to the impact it's having in the community. But, I know we talked briefly about the dried flower and we talked about the concentrates, and like this is kind of what concentrates may look like today. There's various oils, like different forms of like waxy substances that need to be heated to a very high temp, and ingested, and they're very high potency THC in these products. Where that dried flower, is like at the most 36%, these products all sit in that like, probably like 80 to 95% THC. So, they definitely have a lot more of the psychoactive substance in there that can really have an impact on people using it. So there's the 80-20 rule in marketing, and that really applies to the cannabis industry. 80% of the cannabis is consumed by 20% of those who use cannabis. And it's, a lot of people recently, it's come that, people who use cannabis daily exceed the number of people who use alcohol daily. So it's definitely just not even amongst adolescents. It's increasing dramatically through, adults as well. And like big tobacco is now big vape and big cannabis. Like the branding is really targeting young people. And they're marketing to people in like ways that look like fun, non-harmful products. There's like looking at the Starburst example, like they're really marketing it looking like real products. So you may not be realizing you're ingesting it unless you're really careful with looking at labels and things like that. And the one other, common misconception is cannabis dependence. 3 in 10 people who use cannabis would meet the criteria for a cannabis use disorder, and that risk of developing a cannabis use disorder is stronger than people when they start using younger. And youth are 4 to 7 times more likely to develop a cannabis use disorder. The CDC cites other studies that indicate that 1 in 10 of all Americans developing a cannabis use disorder, and 1 in 6 of those are under 18. So it's definitely impacting people under 18 in that adolescent age. And when we look at cannabis, one of the other things you hear is like there's no withdrawal from it. But like realistically, when the more you smoke, the more you ingest, the more your brain depends on this supply of THC. And, it increases your irritability, your depression, your anxiety. It can cause flu-like symptoms. Lack of sleep is another challenge that we hear drastically. But a lot of these symptoms are why people use cannabis in the first place, to help them sleep, to decrease their anxiety. So some people who may be stopping using cannabis may actually be experiencing withdrawal from it. One of the other problems that we see is like just over ingesting or a cannabis overdose, or greening out, is kind of what it's called in the lexicon. And it's not an overdose that will kill you or be fatal like other substances, but it is your body it can't process that much THC in your system, so it increases that anxiety. It may cause a panic attack and that rapid heart rate, and it may even cause you to pass out or vomit, and it can lead to some of those severe mental health concerns like the paranoia, hallucinations, and seizures. Another newer complication associated with this is cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. So that's when people are using a lot of high potency cannabis very regularly. They may have this cyclical vomiting where they can't stop getting sick unless, or they're super nauseous. Unless the things that people have found that have helped that, the symptom is, using cannabis again, taking a hot shower. Some of the emergency departments are using capsaicin cream on the stomach because that can help alleviate some of the symptoms. But, it does not seem pleasant to have that as, a result. And it's not something that people, really understand and know about. One of the other things in Pennsylvania is we're a state where we don't have adult use legalized, but we do have medical marijuana. When we look at, these are the medical conditions that cannabis is approved for. The number 1, 2, and 3 prescribed conditions are anxiety disorders, severe pain, chronic pain, and then PTSD. So, the one of our other presenters is an addiction psychiatrist, and, the approved conditions and the people who approve the conditions, there's a board of 12 people, and only one of them is a medical professional. So, there's not a lot of evidence for a lot of these conditions, particularly, anxiety disorders, ADD, Tourette's, and PTSD. This references, there's a systemic review and meta-analysis. So there was a bunch of independent studies in order to determine overall trends. So, there's not a lot of evidence for some of these conditions that are approved for that, there is a benefit to using cannabis. And cannabis is associated with certain mental health conditions, particularly if there's underlying genetic factors. So if there's a family history of psychosis or schizophrenia, or anxiety and depression, it can exacerbate, or bring on earlier some of these symptoms. So as I said, the follow-up pages for this program is going to be or for more information on these, the vaping and cannabis, that's going to be a good spot for you all to look. We have a lot of different information on there, whether you're trying to stop vaping, or whether somebody who's needs some support. But that's all I have for you tonight. I'm gonna turn it over to Patrick. Patrick Dowling is a licensed professional counselor with a master's degree in clinical counseling and marriage and family therapy. He's trained and worked as an advanced addictions counselor for over 20 years, clinical supervisor, clinical director, administrator, and as a human being. He utilizes various models of therapy, including family systems, motivational interviewing, dialectical behavioral therapy, therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness-based stress reduction, trauma treatment, and relapse prevention. Patrick has been especially known to be successful for his assistance with families and complex interventions. So that's all I have. That's my contact information. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out. But I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn it over to Patrick.
Okay, thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. So I have some notes. I don't have a slide deck, so however you want to handle the screen share is up to you.
I'm gonna pin you real quick. There you go.
So as Bob said, I have a private practice in Exton, Pennsylvania, and my degree is in marriage and family therapy. So I end up doing a lot of work with families who are affected by addiction, substance use, mental health issues, some kind of family crisis or a systemic challenge to the family system. A lot of that intersects with mental health issues and or self-medicating via cannabis or other substances. I am going to speak specifically tonight about what I've seen in terms of my clinical practice, in terms of THC, and how that I've seen that impact my clients and my families, and how I generally encourage my families to respond to THC usage or presence in the family system. So if we talked about, and if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we can get to those at the end. Questions, comments, concerns. I know that we have some preloaded questions that were submitted prior to the program, which was great. So when we talk about the family system, I think about the role of a family system is primarily to create and maintain safety and to help the individuals, the parents, the siblings, the individual child to be safe, to be able to thrive, to be able to be well. And I think it's important to also establish up front that sometimes what I experience is that there's a confusion or a conflation between feeling safe and actually being safe. Feeling well and quote being well. Being well. One of the corollaries I would offer is sometimes when people are struggling with depression, there's a perception that the safest place is in your bed under the covers. And that might actually be the most dangerous place that someone can be when they're depressed. What would be more efficacious would be to get out of bed, be more active, be more engaged, seek help, seek support, seek social connectedness. So I think sometimes my concern specifically with THC is that it artificially induces a sense of well-being. And my concern about THC in general is there are several problematic factors with THC. So one of them for kids is that it's illegal. So I have a concern that kids are now, if there is a THC use, that they are now engaging in an illegal activity, which sets a bad precedent, and it drives some more likelihood of underground, higher risk behavior because it's an illegal activity. And so the means of procurement and the secrecy around it and the secrecy around use also drives some underground, potentially shame-based or what we typically call like antisocial behavior because it's illegal. So that's my concern about THC on the front end. THC also offers several concerning factors in terms of dosage. Dosage is not very consistent, and there's a lot of variability with potencies with THC. I don't know that we would prescribe an antidepressant and say, take roughly this amount, right? We would prescribe a pretty precise amount so that we know if that needed to be modulated up or down, or a mood stabilizer. Similarly, we would prescribe a very specific amount. There would be an induction period and a monitoring period and a feedback loop. So some of my concern with THC in general is that it creates a sense of well-being, but it doesn't necessarily really solve systemically any problems. And I want to just put THC in a larger context for a minute. And I'm going to make a rather blanket statement about substances that have an abusability to them. And I'm going to lump a bunch of things together. Opiates, alcohol, benzodiazepines, and THC specifically. And there's other drugs that have an abusability, any type of speed or uppers. Any of those drugs that I just mentioned, when they are used with any degree of consistency and or abused, create the symptoms that they are intended to treat. So let's talk about opiates right off the bat. So opiates, whether that be Oxycontin, Percocet, as Bob mentioned before, heroin, anything that is an opiate-based product is generally intended to treat pain. But with any type of increased usage, like if I had a surgery and I was prescribed Percocet for any more than 2 or 3 days, yes, it would decrease my experience of pain. It wouldn't treat the underlying causes of the pain. But after 3 or 4 days, I would start becoming, even if I was not a recovering person, which I am, that would cause some kind of physical tolerance and or dependence on that drug, right? So that's not addiction, right? So dependence and addiction are not the same thing. Dependence is my body says, hey, we have an external source for this. We don't have to naturally produce that. Addiction is more about drug-seeking behavior and being dishonest with self or others, or seeking out that substance, right? So opiates, for example, if I took an opiate for more than 2 or 3 days, I would experience some type of withdrawal from that. Might not be terrible, but it would be noticeable. I would start actually experiencing increased pain sensitivity. I have lots of clients who have been opiate addicted, and when they stop, they go to a treatment center, they get off of the opiate, and they had chronic pain, shoulder, back, neck issues. They would rate their pain as an 8 out of 10, and they would get off the opiates altogether, and they would rate their pain at a 1 or a 2. And some of them would rate it at a 0. They would realize, oh, wait a minute, like this has created increased pain sensitivity and decreased tolerance for pain. And so your body amplifies actually the pain message, because the opiates are blocking that message, and your body is saying, no, but we still have pain, and you need to know about that. So we need to use more of the opiate to block that message, right? So opiates are meant to decrease pain, but they actually create over time increased pain sensitivity. Alcohol is a central nervous system depressant. So it decreases central nervous system activity, decreases our blood pressure, decreases our respiration. People feel a little more relaxed, a little more mellow. However, when people are withdrawing from alcohol, if people have drank heavily, the next day they're going to have an increased blood pressure, increased respiration rate, and they're going to be irritable. So alcohol, when we have a binge or have consistent usage of that, the rebound effect is that you're going to have increased symptoms of irritability, and you're going to feel less well, right? So it makes you initially feel well, but ultimately more unwell. Benzodiazepines are similar to alcohol in that they are a central nervous system depressant. They're going to do the same thing. So initially, people are going to feel less anxious, less stressed, decreased blood pressure, decreased respiration, central nervous system gets pushed down. When people are withdrawing or coming off of a significant dose of benzodiazepines, they're going to have increased respiration, heart rate, irritability, and increased agitation. THC, similar. So THC does a couple of different things. So THC has some properties that are a central nervous system depressant. It's also a hallucinogenic medication drug, right? So it's going to decrease anxiety on the front end, short term. It's going to decrease our experience of stress. It's going to create a sense of well-being. But when people are withdrawing, and most THC is about a 4 to 6 hour window of efficacy. So when people are coming off of a significant dose or a chronic dependency on THC, that person is then going to experience increased anxiety, increased stress, and over time, what we see is a decreased distress tolerance, or the decreased ability to be uncomfortable or do hard things. So my concern is if somebody has started using THC to manage anxiety or stress, or children who have a learning difference of some kind, significant learning difference, such as dyslexia, ADHD, or other, another significant learning difference, those students are 50% more likely to develop an addiction. And we could postulate why that is. Self-medicating, it's very uncomfortable, it's very hard to not feel competent, capable in school. It decreases self-esteem. So this is a way to artificially feel the way that someone would want to feel. But it in no way prepares that person to be more successful on the next math test or the next time you have to go to an event that maybe you feel a little awkward or uncomfortable, or publicly speak or make a friend at the lunch table. It doesn't necessarily help you do that more effectively. It actually invites you to seek lower social companionship and people who have a commonality around substance use, not around common goals, interests, values, or what you would like to invite into your life consciously. So part of my concern around any substance that has an abusability to it is that, yes, it might be short-term effective, but long-term it's actually counterproductive. And it leaves that person not any better off, actually less well off to manage the initial stressor or the initial reason why the person started using that substance in the first place, right? So back to our jobs as families. I'm married. I have 3 children. We live in the Westchester School District. So our job, I think, as family, as parents, is to create safety for ourselves, number one, for our spouse if we're married, or in a committed relationship, and then our family. And what I often see is when families don't necessarily endorse or support some kind of substance use, but they allow it anyway. As a friend of mine says, how big a monster do you want to let into your house? And so I would ask everybody on this call, like, what size monster would you like to let into your house? I would imagine the answer is no size, is 0. But the challenge with THC is that could be in some ways rather innocuous and not necessarily potentially significantly damaging, or it could be quite damaging and quite dysregulatory to somebody's mental health. So I'm not a big fan of the use of THC for medical issues because I think there are a lot more effective medications that can be managed in terms of dosage and in terms of delivery mechanism and in terms of an open dialogue with a prescriber about what's effective and what's not. And I think it opens a door that creates, I don't like solutions that create a secondary problem. I think that THC can create a significant secondary problem in terms of, one, mental health issues, 2, addiction, which is a mental health issue, and 3, it's a lost opportunity to solve the problem in a more adaptive, healthy way and create more solution. So I don't love when people use THC because I think, wait, that was like really low on the list of potential solutions to this issue. And maybe we could maybe we could use those other strategies first. I tend to be a fan of a hard line with THC, and I tend to view THC use like wearing a seatbelt. Um, it's a general best practice and it's a law to wear your seatbelt. And I think it's not probably, I think it's a really bad idea to say, hey, kid, you don't like wearing a seatbelt, so you don't have to wear a seatbelt. And you just kind of like it and you don't, and like, that's okay. I don't imagine that we would say that, but I do think that when we give a green light or a passive green light to THC use, I think, ooh, we just kind of told a kid, like, maybe you don't have to wear your seatbelt and let's hope that this goes well. So I have a concern that it's not really a best practice. It opens the doors for lots of potential bad outcomes. And I think it inhibits a lot of the ability to meet developmental milestones effectively and work through those. I mean, being a teenager is very challenging, but to meet those challenges head on and to arrive at meaningful, sustainable answers about yourself and about how you handle yourself in the world, how you handle relationships, how you handle stressors, how you handle a history exam or a challenging teacher or, peer relationships. those deserve meaningful answers. And I think my concern is when we turn the relief valve, we don't necessarily really answer that question meaningfully, and we don't set that person is not set up for future success. They're set up for, I turn a relief valve, and that's, I think, a dangerous precedent, especially because teenagers are learning how to adapt and solve problems, and I don't think THC is a great solution for that. When I am working with a family system that has some substance use on board, specifically THC, I'm actually less interested in the THC use, and I'm more interested in what is the adaptive need, what's the healthy need that the person has that they're trying to get met from THC. So in my mind, THC is sort of a presenting problem. I'm interested in what the underlying issue is. Like, what problem are you trying to solve? Is it they're uncomfortable? Is it social anxiety? Is it conflict at home? Is it dating? Like, what is it, right? That you're trying to solve with this mechanism. And I try to focus on how do we help that person solve, address, meet that issue with integrity and with sustainable solutions that help that person be successful at the next hard thing that they have to do. A couple things, Bob mentioned cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. We're seeing this more and more presenting in the emergency room. I've worked with several clients. I used to do interventions. In one of the cases that I worked with, I had a young guy. He was in Westchester, and he was a very heavy THC user, and he was experiencing cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome for about the third time, where he was uncontrollably vomiting for a couple days at a time, and at risk of dehydrating. And so we had planned this intervention for a Sunday, and I got a phone call that he had gotten arrested, had smoked a lot of weed, and had become violent with his girlfriend, and got arrested and was in jail in Westchester. So we went and picked him up, and we cut the intervention team in half, and we met him in an interview room at the Chester County or Westchester jail, which, by the way, is a very quiet jail. There's not a lot going on in Westchester. So we met this kid, and it was quite horrible. He had feces kind of all over his lower body. It was a disaster. And he said, "Hey, I want to go home and get a shower," which also helps with cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. It helps to downregulate the central nervous system. And I said, "Well, that's fine. You can shower at the rehab center that we have lined up for you." And he was facing an assault charge and a public intoxication charge. And he did not want to go to treatment, understandably. And long story short, he ended up going to treatment. He threw up in my car in a trash bag 30 times on the hour and a half ride to treatment. And we had to take him to the emergency room to get him stabilized. They were using benzodiazepines at that time to stabilize the chronic vomiting. And it was, again, the third time this guy had gone through this. So they finally got him stabilized on a benzo. And I just went up to the guy and I said, "Hey," this young kid, and I said, "Hey, it doesn't have to be like this, right? You just got an assault charge on your girlfriend. You're failing out of college. Things aren't going well. You've had this cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome 3 times." I said, "Look, man, like, we can help you figure out how to be happy and how to be well." And this kid, dressed in a hospital gown, still covered in feces from the waist down, looked at me and he said, "I'm pretty happy." And I said, "Dude, you just threw up 30 times in my car. This is not what happy looks like. And you're in the emergency room and your parents are saying, go to treatment or you can't come home." My concern with THC at an extreme level like that is that there's such a diluted perspective. And this kid thought, no, I'm like, things are going well. And by all counts, anybody would say, this is not going well. That is my concern, is the potential corruptive value of chronic THC use. Is he's living in an alternate reality where things are going really well. The university, his parents, and his girlfriend, and the Westchester Police Department did not think he was doing well, nor did anybody in his family think he was doing well. So I think that's where I think our job as family members and as parents specifically is to toe a line and say, here's what we will support and here's what we won't. Here's the fundamental challenge I think parents have. If we have a value system, it's okay to ask our kids to honor our value system. My concern is when parents don't ask and don't require that their kid honor their value system, they've already lost because they didn't ask or be insistent. And so I think what I see a lot is parents usurping or giving away their own power to create and maintain safety by drawing a hard line of saying, here are things that we'll support and we'll accept, and here's the things that we won't. There is no significant research that indicates that THC is, at the end of the day, beneficial. There's lots of research and anecdotal information to indicate that this is contraindicated and not a best practice. So I get it, the FOMO, don't want to miss out, don't want my kid to be left out. My concern is we open the door to some significant negative consequences when we allow THC use. A lot of the families that I work with have to get to the point where they have to say to their loved one, we have made a choice that we're going to create safety for ourselves and for you. And substance use and dysregulated behavior is not acceptable. And we're inviting you to step into a safe place. And if you're going to choose THC or drug use or whatever over the safety of our family system, you can't live here because you're violating the fundamental agreement around maintaining safety. Children have an inherent responsibility to be governable, right? So when children are not able or listening or respecting their parents' guidance, there's an opportunity for them to be, quote, ungovernable, right? And they can be placed on probation and charged and held to account to be coachable, to be governed, to allow their parents to govern them effectively. So my concern is when parents are afraid to hold that level of accountability, to say, we're the parents, we're going to set the tone for what's acceptable and what's not, and we expect that to be respected. And kids are going to cross the line from time to time. It's understandable, but they need to be kind of corrected back into line because we're smarter and more experienced and have been around longer and know some things. And I think it's in our inherent responsibility as parents to create safety and to respect our authentic power to create that safety and invite our children to come into compliance with that. My concern is when parents don't hold that line, I see that kids don't trust them because they don't hold safety. I've had kids tell me when their parents were rather absent that they would pretend that they had a curfew so that they could act like their parents cared about them. But the parents didn't have a curfew and a kid could do whatever they wanted. I think that kids crave structure and predictability and safety, and some kids are going to push back on that for a variety of reasons, and that's understandable. But I strongly encourage the parents that I work with to create safety for themselves first and to create safety for their family system and to not allow the tail to wag the dog and not allow a 15, 16, 17-year-old to dictate terms about what will be acceptable in that family's home or not. That person is not qualified. They don't have the life experience. They are insulated from full responsibility about their life choices. And I think parents have an inherent responsibility to create that safety. And when I sometimes do interventions and somebody figures out that I'm the one driving the bus on parents changing their tune and holding a level of accountability, sometimes the kids say, not so nice a term, I don't like you, right? And they sometimes use more colorful language than that. And I say, that's okay. I don't want you to like me now. I want you to like me 5 years from now. And I think that as parents, I think it's important for us to be popular with ourselves first and popular with our kids second. And so I have a very strong opinion that I don't perceive that THC offers significant benefit, significant risk factors. One of the things I'll offer you to think about is 70% of mental health clients with schizophrenia use nicotine. So because I think schizophrenia is a very, very, very challenging mental health diagnosis, and I think people with that diagnosis are quite desperate to self-medicate and feel different or feel better and get some symptom abatement. So it's not an accident that 70% of people with schizophrenia use nicotine. I don't think that schizophrenic patients think nicotine's good for them. I think they think I am so uncomfortable and I need something to modulate how I feel. As a corollary, I think being a teenager is also very hard and uncomfortable. I don't know that we should hand them a pack of cigarettes or THC. I think we should help them work through what is challenging or struggling, causing them to struggle, because I think it creates a secondary problem that could be avoided if we leaned into the answer more effectively. So I do see, my clients who thrive share a couple commonalities. They have really healthy, stable relationships. They have really pretty solid emotional intelligence, and they have pretty solid distress tolerance, or the ability to do uncomfortable or hard things. I perceive that when people are going through a hard thing, sometimes the worst thing that we can do is give them an artificial relief valve. Not that getting support or encouragement and or tutoring or mental health services or just a hug, those are great things. But sometimes we need to do hard things in order to demonstrate that we can do hard things. I had a gentleman in a parent support group or a parent group one time, and I had not met this person before. And uh, he was maybe mid to late 60s. And I could just see that this guy had been through some things. Like he had accomplished, you could tell by the way he carried himself. And I said, look, I don't know you, but I'm going to ask you to tell me about the three things in your life that you're the most proud of. And before you answer me, I'm going to bet that those three things were hard. And he said, well, I've been married to the same woman for 40 years. And we laughed and we said, oh, bet you that wasn't. And his wife was sitting next to him. They both kind of laughed and said, well, that wasn't easy, right? And I quit smoking 15 years ago. And last year, I retired as a chief of police and I have a high school education. And I thought, wow, all three of those things were very hard and very challenging, but those are the things that he feels most proud of in his life. I perceive that when teenagers, young adults are going through a challenging thing, that is a time to help them have appropriate resources in place to be successful and develop learned um, positive expectancy, not learned helplessness. And my concern is with the THC use, I don't think that that helps that person onboard a higher level of confidence in self. I think that actually makes them feel less competent and less capable and artificially dependent on a medication or a drug to make them feel like they can be effective, but it doesn't necessarily help them feel competent or capable, nor is it generalizable to other situations that are hard or difficult. And they feel like, well, wait, I did that last thing that was hard. I can do the next thing that's hard because life is hard. Um, One of the things that I think about is real fun leaves no remorse when it's over. That if, Bob and I were laughing and joking and Bob and I walked away and we said, well, we had a nice time. That was fun. Or we laughed and joked in a way that made Bob feel bad and Bob walked away and said, that Patrick's a jerk. Well, that wasn't clean fun, right? And I do think that the THC use is somewhat problematic in that there's a lot of underground behavior because of the legality, because of the social acceptability. So my concern is if that's a relief valve or a potential solution, I don't think it's clean because it leaves some remorse. And it doesn't necessarily leave that person more with a higher degree of positive expectancy about how their life's going to go in the future. So we can talk more. I want to be respectful of time. And I know that I think Brian's going to jump in, and talk about his lived experience. But I think it's pretty safe to say, my experience is if the THC is coming on board, I think that's a really great opportunity for parents to check in about what their values are and what's important to them and make sure that they're staying within their value system and that they don't check their judgment or their common sense at the door and give in to some of the quote peer pressure from their kids to cave on an issue that does not have a lot of indicators that this is a good idea. So that's what I have. I know we're going to do some stuff in the Q&A section, but I appreciate everybody for, showing up and being a thoughtful participant in this process. So I think we can all agree that all of our children have lied to us at least once. And if you have the child who's never lied, please call me. Like that would be epic. I would like to meet that person, right? Um, in regards to testing, I tend to think about trusting but verify. And because alcohol, THC, substance use are shiny things, right? And offer a promise. I think that it becomes more likely um, that our kids would chase something that offers a significant promise. And I think it is our job to trust our kids to be kids. And I don't know that it means we trust them any less, but we have to trust and understand where they are developmentally and trust that they need some guardrails and some protections. And um, I'm a parent of three teenagers. I have zero problem testing. And we have a policy that if one of my kids tests positive, whatever car they were going to drive sits until they test clean, period. That's a risk for them. It's a risk for other people on the road. It's a risk for my insurance. It's a risk all around, right? Um, so I have seen zero disruption in my relationships with my kids because of that policy. I see that they respect that. I mean, to be honest, they also respect that both of their parents are in long-term sobriety. We're both over 25 years sober. And what I say to them is, look, the price of admission on a house that's very safe and stable is that we don't allow drug use in our house. And personally, because marijuana used to be one of my favorite things, and we're not having that. Because if I relapse, this whole thing falls apart, right? So the price of admission for me is I'm not going to have drug use in my house. And if there is, there's going to be corrective measures. And we do test. Like I have a college kid and she tests when she comes home. And if she tests clean, she gets to drive the car. And if she doesn't, she doesn't. And it's not a problem. Um, because I'm all about creating safety for myself, and my kids get to be the secondary beneficiary of that safety. So I really don't see like my concern is if a kid's going to say our relationship is fractured because you drug tested me. I think that's not the real issue, right? Like if you had a really solid, stable relationship and they're going to throw their hands up because you drug tested them, I would throw that out. That's baloney. I think there's more to it than that, and or they don't respect the parents' authority enough, because they're going to get handed keys to a car that I'm sure they didn't earn and pay for the insurance and all that stuff by themselves. If they did, that's awesome, but I don't think that that's the case in most families. So I just think sometimes kids have the ability to write a check that they can't back up. So our job is to say, here's the checks you're allowed to write, here's the checks you're not. And I haven't seen kids, when kids are doing the right thing and they're not, running around doing extracurricular high risk activities, they don't mind the testing. And when they have something to protect or something that they're doing that is not above board, it's going to be a problem. So I don't see the testing. I mean, I think the testings are realistic. Look, doctors, nurses, and airline pilots have an 86% recovery rate, and they get tested. And I work with these folks, and they get tested regularly, and it's intrusive. And they have to blow in a tube or take a blood test or all of it, and or go do a hair follicle. Like they got to do a lot of stuff to keep their ticket to practice their profession. And that's just the price of admission. But they also have an 86% recovery rate because they're forced to recover or they lose their ability to practice their profession. I don't know why we would hold our kids to a lower standard than we hold those three professions. It works. Not every time. 86 isn't 100%, but at least it buys the kid a longer runway of learning how to self-regulate and manage, like you said, manage anxiety or stress. And that's a beautiful thing, like getting to go to medical school, but stress is normative in that environment, and you got to learn how to manage it because if you're going to become a physician, you're going to have stress there too. So I think being a teenager is an audition for life, and let's help them be prepared. And the 30-day thing is a pain in the butt, right? And I think then don't do it. And I'm like, well, all right, so it's going to take you 30 days to test clean. Now, probably not 30 days unless you're using heavily or chronically. But I'm like, guess you just bought 30, like 2 or 3 weeks on restriction of some kind. Maybe don't do that. It's a great way to learn is when you demonstrate like the people can handle their autonomy well, they get more of it. And when they demonstrate that they can't, they get less of it. That's the way the world works. And that's, I think, what effective parenting looks like. Handle autonomy well, and we'll give you a lot of it. And you handle it well, we got to start pulling back. It's not punishment. It's just failure to demonstrate that you can handle autonomy well.
And I know that's something that Kim gets asked a lot, like coming at it from Kim's our executive director, for those of you who don't know. And she got into this line of work because she's got a son in recovery. And one of the things that she always says is like, if you don't want to actually drug test your kid, but like you think there's a problem, like, doctors can do it, behavioral health professionals can do it. Like, it's something that, if you don't want to be the one to actually have to like, do it, like there's other ways to get that support. If you're concerned about your child's substance use, they may already be getting some type of behavioral health services at that point that, they may be, the ones to do it. So, it can be,
Mhm.
it's up to every parent. It's different in how they want to parent their kid. So, there's other ways around it if you do think it's a concern where you would need to be, seeing if your kid's being truthful.
Well, and I think, Bob, to your point, look, it's a tough environment. It has become quite normalized. Um, the THC, the deltas, and I just think maybe let's not buy things that go in our bodies from a gas station. I'm like, this is what we're doing? Like, really? Um,
I barely want to buy a hot dog from a gas station. So, like, why would I pick
it's
my,
just not great, right?
yeah.
Um, so my concern is now we're buying like a drug that we're putting in our body from a gas station. Like, this is bad. Like, this is a low level of solution seeking. There's much better answers than this. And I get it, and it's normative and it's available, and I know and everybody else knows where you can go and where you can get what, and they're not going to card you or ask you anything, and it's a tough world.
And Patrick, you were kind of touching on one of the advanced questions. And, while this program is really focused on like adolescents, there's definitely a normalization around it, around adults. So, like, if there's normalization of it within a family system, how would you be talking about it with the adults who may not see any harm with it, if their, child starting to experiment as well?
Um, so this is the controversial thing that I say, which may not be as controversial as I think it is. The most powerful thing we do as children, as parents, is modeling. Um, and I'll give you a simple example. My daughter just finished her first year at college, and she got into a really good school. She worked really hard. And when she was applying to schools, she said to my wife, and I are both licensed counselors. She said, well, I'm probably going to get a master's degree. And she said something like, well, I know that it's really important to you and mom that I get a master's degree. And she's been super self-sufficient. We haven't talked to this kid about her academics since seventh grade. She's on top of it. She did a bunch of AP. She's on it, right? And I said, I've never talked to you about that. Like, I don't have a strong feeling about your education. It's your education. Like, we're making funds and opportunities available to you, but like, it's your education. Like, I don't care if you get a master's degree or not. That's your call. The fact that my wife and I both have master's degrees was some kind of modeling for her. And she thought, well, oh, that's kind of what's expected. And I thought, well, not necessarily. Like, I don't know what your path is, right? My point in saying that is that was a modeling. Like, both of us are educated. We do talks, we give, presentations, and we read research articles and all this stuff. So it's evident that we value education. But we never talked to her directly about that and said, hey, education is really important, right? I think the most important thing that we do as parents is modeling. And here's the controversial piece. I have never, not one time in 25 years of doing this family work, not one time have I seen parents hold their children to a higher level of accountability than they hold themselves. So if parents let themselves off the hook and do a thing that maybe isn't the best move, they're not going to hold their kid accountable. They just won't. They just won't. And I can tell you story after story after story. When I used to work at Care and Treatment Center, I had a family I was working with, and the kid was opiate addicted, and we were talking about what happens after 30 days. And I'm on the phone with the dad, and we're talking about this kid maybe coming home and or a recovery house or whatever. And it's like 3 o'clock on a Thursday, and I hear something on the phone call, and I said, "Sir, is that ice in your glass?" And he says, "Yeah." So what do you have on rocks there? He says, I'm having a whiskey." I said, "Do you understand that you're talking to your son's addiction counselor about where he goes after he's here, and you're having a whiskey on the call? Do you think that that might be problematic? We're sending an opiate addicted kid home to his dad who drinks at 3 o'clock. That might be a relapse trigger for him because we're going to tell this kid that he's got to do X, Y, and Z, but you're having a whiskey at 3 o'clock while you're on the phone with his addiction counselor. That's a problem." That kid did not go to aftercare. He went home, which probably did not have a good outcome. So my counsel is, if you want to talk to your kids about THC, make sure that you're square with where you're at with it first. Because that's the power, is modeling, is here's what I do, here's what I think is important, and here's what I do about that. So when I have parents who are going through some kind of addicted issue with their kids, and I'll just be very direct about what I tell parents, I say, I will work with you, but you have to do three things. You have to start going to a parent support group because this is really hard, and you're going to have to swim upstream against your paternal maternal instinct, and you're going to have to set some clean boundaries. I'm going to ask you to do some reading. I give them a book to read, No More Letting Go. I have them read that book. And I ask them to make a commitment to collaborating with a professional around the care and decisions that are made. Meaning, if it's addiction, addiction loves to get people isolated and alone and emotional and making bad decisions. So we have protective factors where we seek professional help. And if all the smart people in the room agree, it's probably a good idea. And if some of the smart people in the room don't agree, it's probably not a good idea. So I think that there's some significant protective factors via getting some peer support, getting educated, and making sure that you have a third non-emotional party involved in a conversation about what happens next to maintain safety. This kind of journey is really, really, really difficult. I see people who are successful who over-resource this, and I see people who struggle who under-resource this. I think that people are hard pressed to over-resource this. It's kind of like, in my mind, well, Ryan, you're in school. The best way to learn something is overlearn it. Like it like comes out your ears. You just know it, right? It's second nature. And I think that this recovery stuff is so challenging. And if people can overlearn this, it becomes automatic. And what my favorite thing is when parents and I work with families and they're going through a hard thing and they've done a lot of work and they come in and tell me about a hard thing that happened and how they handled it, they just automatically did the right things and it went really well. Not that it was like smooth, but they handled a tough thing really well because they had overlearned how to do a hard thing. They drilled and drilled and drilled, and they got really good at hitting a hard thing, making phone calls to their support group, checking in about their bottom lines, having an open dialogue and a collaborative dialogue with a recovery team. That's fantastic. But that doesn't just happen by itself. People have to do a lot of front work to make that possible. So that's a long-winded answer to your question about the THC use. But I think whether it's vodka on the rocks or whatever on the rocks or THC use, I think that what we do as parents and modeling is incredibly powerful. If for nothing else, that when I work with parents and the kid says, hey, here's a hard thing and here, what do I do about it? And the parent says, well, here's what I do about it. I go to this parent support group. I do this, I do this, I have this counseling, like I'm doing all these things. That's a fantastic answer because if the kid did shoots 80% of what the parent just said, that would be a great outcome. So I think that parents have an opportunity to model the positive behaviors and not ask their kid to do something they're not willing to do, but demonstrate that they're willing, and it buys them street credit with their kid and said, hey, here's what I do. Not what you should do, but here's what I do. That's really powerful.
Thanks, Patrick. That was pretty insightful. Yeah, that modeling piece is definitely something that I keep hearing and thinking about as I'm raising my family. Got a long question in the chat, but someone asked, the take on CBD, also with cannabis as a harm reduction intervention for alcohol and opioid use. There's been multiple medication failures, long trials and the side effects, especially if the individual is relapsing with fentanyl. They're asking for a medical card. Any insight on that? So one of the things that, Pennsylvania opioid use disorder is considered one of the conditions that you can have a medical card for. One of the reasons they implemented that is so they could do some research to see if it was an effective intervention, and they haven't released any of the research. So there's just not that's the one thing is like there's really not a lot of good research out there from what I've seen, but Patrick can maybe talk about that like clinically, what you see.
So one of the things I didn't see in here was, I'm sorry, a discussion about Sublocade. Um, so I am a very big fan of Sublocade. For opiate dependent clients specifically. So Sublocade, if you're not familiar, is a once a month injectable medication. It is a very similar action to Suboxone. It is a opiate antagonist. It's also a replacement therapy. But the thing I like about Sublocade for opiate addiction is a couple things. Well, a few things I like. Number one, is once somebody takes the shot, it's in their body. So you have a forced, 30 day. Some people take the second dose like 28 days um, for most efficacy. But anyway, you have a 30-day forced efficacy, forced compliance, right? Suboxone, you have to administer daily, if not more than once a day. Sublocade is once it's in your body, it's in your body. Number two, the half-life on Sublocade is really long. So if people build up a therapeutic dose of Sublocade, let's just say 6 months, at a year's time, I'm sorry, 6 months after their last dose, they are still at a therapeutic level. So the half-life on Sublocade is way longer than Suboxone. So it offers somebody, not that it's going to make sure that they don't use it all, but we're not winning the war on drugs. We're not winning the war on opiates. I mean, the trends in the last couple of years are actually moving in the right direction, but it's such a tough drug. So not that everybody who has an opiate addiction should be on Sublocade, but I think if somebody has a significant relapse history or does not have significant internal and external coping strategies, Sublocade's a really great medication because it helps them buy some time to build that internal and external resource. So I would encourage a conversation about Sublocade with a addiction psychiatrist because of one, the compliance, two, the really long half-life. I have several clients who I've helped transition and gotten them to a provider off of Suboxone and to Sublocade, and it's way less intrusive. And it's a really nice insurance policy because the half-life is so long. I mean, it's unbelievable that you could take a medication and 6 months later still be at a therapeutic dose. So that may or may not be appropriate in this case, but that would be my first thought more so than THC as a next medication for that. And, if there's a compliance issue, maybe there's an issue around, are they in the right controlled environment or recovery environment to buy time? I do think with opiate addiction on the front end, we're buying time because most treatment episodes are not long enough. And so if we can get somebody in a program for a longer period of time and buy them some stability and some increased self-efficacy, that would be really valuable. And I think that's one of the things that like a controlled environment and or Sublocade helps to do. That's a long answer to that question, but I didn't see Sublocade mentioned there, and that would be my first thought based on that history presented. Now, it's a secondary answer. Like it's not a great answer, right? In my mind, like if we're going to then enter into a conversation about THC use as a opiate replacement, it's not really a gold standard. It's not really the best level of care, but I'm just concerned that we're already starting to compromise on some things in terms of best practices. But it's if that's where you're at in your terms, you're talking about harm reduction. I think it's a worthwhile conversation. I would just be concerned about what other things could we do to add value aside from THC.
Just wanted to thank everyone for coming out tonight, and thanks Bob and Patrick for all your insight. Much appreciated.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Bob. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.